Hi, friends. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Hello APGD, a neighborhood podcast about the Audubon Park Garden District in Orlando, Florida. I'm your host, Michael Lothrop, and today we'll be speaking with Richard Reep, artist, writer, architect, educator, and longtime Audubon Park resident. You can check out Richard's collection of 34 paintings inspired by Audubon Park at fineartamerica.com/profiles/Richard-Reep. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, or if you'd like to be a sponsor, please feel free to message me on Instagram at HelloAPGDPod. Thank you for listening. This episode is brought to you in part by Trevor Brown, Audubon Park resident and trusted Central Florida realtor with Fannie Hillman & Associates, proudly serving their clients for over 40 years. For listings, market trends, helpful home buyer and seller tips, email directly to Trevor at fanniehillman.com or find him on Instagram at Trevor Brown Realtor. And with me today is Richard Reep, artist, writer, architect, sustainable urban studies professor at Rollins College, and much more. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Definitely. You're quite a busy man, but you are kind of on a holiday break right now, so thank you for taking the time.
Yes, I am. Yeah, thanks for letting me here. My day job right now is I'm an architect, and I work for a little toy company called Lego.
I think I've heard of it.
Yeah.
Do they have some movies too, right?
They do.
They're
have
movie
a couple
stars.
Movies. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. And so up until like Friday before Christmas, I've got 3 projects under construction and 2 in design.
Okay.
And so really up until Friday, every project was throwing a hand grenade through the window. So I would get the hand grenade back out the window before it exploded. So
That's, especially before the holidays, that's when everybody wants to like kind of be clear of any of those
Right.
major disturbances. So did you have a hand in Legoland and the hotel there? Or
the hotel. That
Okay.
was my design. Mhm.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I haven't checked it out yet. How is it?
It's amazingly full all the time.
Yeah.
People can't get enough of it. And so we designed it for kids, like with kids in mind.
Sure.
So when you walk in, the biggest deal in the whole, well, there's 2 big deals in the whole lobby. The first one is when you walk in, there's just big, massive Legos. And you think of mom and dad, and they've driven 3 days down from Michigan, and it's the first time they've stopped and seen sunlight. Kids race to it, and they get in it while the mom and dad are in line to check. It's just incredible.
Yeah. I have heard, actually, I have a friend who stayed there with her kids, and they had the best time. I mean,
Did
it's
they?
just like, yeah, not many things are designed just for like, or starting with the kids in mind, right? That's
Yeah.
like a pretty special thing.
Yeah, it took a lot of really thinking through. And of course, they're masters at it. This isn't their first hotel, so they kind of did a lot of guidance. But
Yeah.
the lobby there is laid out so there's a big play structure when you are further back. And so at night, you think about coming back from the park and everyone is really tired and probably taking a nap in the room. But after dinner, there's a bar that faces the play structure.
Mm.
Key linkage.
Yes. So
So-
you can drink and still keep an eye on your kid. Is that
Mom
the
and
idea?
dad they set up at the bar. The
Uh-huh.
kids are within line of sight.
Sure.
And there's a couple of, Disney calls them cast members, but we call them model citizens,
I like that.
like little Lego models.
Okay. Yeah.
They come out and they start gently getting into it with them, and then they start getting the kids into like show mode, and they actually have a character. They get the kids to start singing, dancing, and they just have the best time. So instead of having a show like in Vegas, the guests are the show.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's such a great idea. So these model citizens, are they dressed like the Lego characters? Do they have the whole thing?
There's a combination. Yeah, they
Okay.
have the suits.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, which are all foam padded and stuff. And then there's some that are just dressed in, the regular hotel attire.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. So that you know that they're official, and then you have the actual Lego people. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, so it's fun. So it's really good because my wife says mentally I'm still 7.
Yeah, that's a great thing to be. I mean, we are as old as we feel, right?
Right.
And it's a
So-
special thing to keep your youth like intact.
Mhm.
That's one of the most important things, I think.
It is, absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah,
There's so much joy in it.
stay connected to that inner child,
Yeah, I mean that I feel like that energy is always there. We just kind of, we're told to block it, right? It's like if we're not doing something creative, especially, I feel like the creativity is kind of the thing that allows a lot of us to stay connected with that child, that like exploration and that interest in discovering and kind of honing your skills, and it's just play in a sort of way, right?
Yeah.
Do you have an Audubon Park series? Tell me about that.
Yeah. So I came here. I'm glad we had a little bit of time so I could bike around and actually just recall Audubon Park a little bit. Because what I wanted to do is come here, and because your podcast to me is kind of like a local StoryCorps, right?
Yes, that's the idea.
Yeah,
Totally.
yeah. So I've brought some stories of Audubon Park past,
Mm-hmm.
and then that's kind of part of Audubon Park present. And then if you really want to go walk on the wild side, we could talk about Audubon Park future.
Yes.
But that part, so talking about the present first, during the pandemic, there was nothing to do. The theme parks were closed, and we just kind of sat around. So I had a couple of little side projects. I had a really wonderful opportunity with a dear friend of mine who asked me to design a house addition. So I did during the pandemic, and it was here in Audubon Park, and it was for her grandmother. So one thing was really great was I didn't have to go anywhere, and so I took every day and just walked around Audubon Park, and I just became in tune with the vibe of the architecture of it.
Yes.
So it's very interesting. It has a very interesting vibe that I don't know if any of your guests have picked up on or talked about.
Definitely. Yeah, it's pretty specific, right? That mid-century, but there's something more to it, right? It's kind of specific to this neighborhood, right?
Yeah. So Thomas Hines wrote a book called Populux. It talks about the kind of design aesthetic of mid-century modern, and how right after the war, and there was growth, and he doesn't talk in Florida specifically, but it lends itself perfectly. Design ethic was that of the future, and how great it was going to be. We were going to have cars, which were deprived of for up until then. It was very rare.
Mm-hmm.
Mobility, aircraft, travel, and just the fact that science had solved so many problems,
Mm-hmm.
medical, everything.
Yeah.
So all that was reflected in the architecture, and so Populux was about that kind of new hope, that new era. And what's interesting, if you look at, I think Ryan Rivas did a really excellent job of describing the history of Colonial Town.
Mm-hmm.
So the history of Audubon Park is fascinating because it was laid out in 1948 and 49. The first houses were built in 1953. It's right in the prime of all that.
Yeah.
So you see the kind of the low slanted roof lines that are kind of pulled apart a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
versus Colonial Town, where they're a much more traditional shape. You see a lot more of sort of the principles of modernism really creep into the domestic architecture. So houses had ribbon windows, where there was like lots of glass.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to have lots of glass. Whereas like in Colonial Town, you see these very squarish, very smaller. The window was a punctured opening in a very carefully walled building.
Yes. Just more functional than anything else, right? Like traditional, functional, not with as much design in mind as some of the houses here, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the windows were much more open. The interiors had much more free flow, just like your house, where the rooms all sort of blended together: the kitchen, the living room, the dining room, the back porch, etc. Whereas in some of the older homes before, like in the 1930s, they were very set, formal. You moved from one room to another, and they were very formal and very separated.
Mm-hmm.
So Audubon Park has such a great inventory of that, so much so that when Kim and I bought a house here, we all we did was clean it up, kind of clean off all those that it acquired over the decades.
Yeah. What year was that?
It was built, we moved here in 2016,
Okay.
but we lived 6 blocks north since 2002.
Okay. All right.
So, yeah, so I've been around Audubon Park now for 20 years.
This has been your neighborhood for 20 years. Excellent.
Yeah. And so there was the use of materials, like you'll see a lot of stacked block, which is very much a hallmark of the 50s, where the block was like a new material. We didn't used to have it. And so when it started getting prevalent, builders were just fascinated by the possibility of it.
Yeah.
And then the block screens, they call it breeze block,
I love breeze blocks.
Yeah,
Very
all the
cool.
varieties of those.
And perfect for Florida too, right? Because it kind of lets some flow through.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where it
exactly.
needs to.
Exactly. And the thing that was, to me, the most interesting, and I kept getting drawn to, you had cars for the first time. They became affordable to a lot of people. So, the car is a controversial topic when it comes to architecture and urban planning, right?
Right. Sure.
At the time, it was a mark of status. I've got a car. So the carport juts out in front. It's pride of place. And those car parts are marvelous because they're just like these thin blades. It's like the wing of a 707 or something coming out.
Yeah.
And they're supported. Again, this is another hallmark of modernism. They're supported on these little, thin, skinny little columns. And then sometimes the columns are at angles. So the whole thing just emphasizes movement and lightness and delicacy, and the air kind of flowing through in space, kind of free-flowing in and out. And there's a couple houses left here in Audubon Park where there's actually so much so in the design that they actually lifted the roof off the top of the wall and let glass go up in there. So you have this upper window that allows light to kind of wash into the house. They call that a clear story.
Okay.
Because it's like a second story, but it's clear. And so you see all that, and I was fascinated by it. And then there's Michael, there's tons of detail that it's actually quite rich in detail when you look at it. Just the use of, there's a house down on Robin that has this walk up to the front door, and beside it there's this beautiful kind of a rusticated brick feature that's the chimney. It's so Frank Lloyd Wright. And and then the carports that there's another one on the corner, I think it's on the corner of Osprey and Chelsea, maybe, that it's got the most beautiful, the carport is held up by this lacy kind of rectilinear grid pattern of columns and there's a lot of those around here where the builder just took something functional, which is a column, but made it into something kind of decorative and modern.
So amazing.
So all of that got to me. And then just the way the houses were talking to each other in terms of the way the roofs would sort of like kind of syncopate along a street. And then Raven, this street, if you get on Chapel and turn right on Raven, there's a lot of that original architecture, and everybody along there, it's like this kind of jazz band where everybody's picked their own personal shade of green or blue, and they just kind of talk to each other all the way down the street.
Yeah. I've watched the evolution of that too, because the colors were vastly different 20 years ago when I moved here, right? And it's like families have been in and out, of different houses along the street. And yeah, you can definitely see that confluence happen. It's pretty magical. I think not having a homeowners association telling you, you have to abide by certain color schemes or regulations. It's like people can change their houses in ways that wouldn't be allowed in other neighborhoods because of HOAs. And we're very lucky to not have that. One of the drawbacks, obviously, is some of the homes are being torn down and rebuilt and not keeping with the style whatsoever. And that's really hard to watch. I mean, it's the percentage. I'm not really sure how many people are keeping the architecture that's there and kind of updating it or adding to it as opposed to the teardowns and rebuilds. But we hope that people will hang on to their homes.
I hope so too, Michael. That's something when you get tuned into that Populux wavelength and you see the newer homes going in, big, heavy, thick, clunky, massive. The columns out front are like, elephant legs. They don't have that lightness or delicacy. What they speak of is fortress.
Yes.
It's just kind of crushing that original sort of open airiness of Audubon Park, and the fact that the houses did have that ability to sort of talk to each other a little bit. Those houses are not about that. They're about security and cocooning and all those values that seem to be more fashionable right now.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of those houses are selling in kind of the $1 million range, which is double of what most of the homes here are going for. And I mean, it's wild to see how much the housing prices have changed. I know we're not unique in that aspect in Central Florida. I know it's happening everywhere, but to kind of see what things were 20 years ago as opposed to now, it's like an unrecognizable market as opposed to where we were.
Yeah, we lived on Norris Avenue up on the other side of Corinne. And the house we lived in, what I was going to say is when we moved here, we saw enough of the original mid-century. Kim and I said, we could almost do a mid-century modern house tour here in Audubon Park, just in Audubon Park. But that takes a lot of work, and you need people to, accept it. And you never know what the inside is like either. You walk in and you're like, ooh, not this house. But we were on a mid-century modern house tour up on Norris Avenue in 2012. And that house was 1953 also. We seemed to stick to 1953.
Yeah, it was a good year for homes, right?
Good year, yeah. And
it had all those same kind of aesthetic decisions made.
Mm-hmm.
Interior was, and some of the homes here have it. They're very clean and minimalist. In other words, like the door frames around the doors, there aren't any.
Mm-hmm.
They just tuck the plaster into the door jamb.
Mm-hmm.
Same with the windows. And when you're talking about, a house doesn't have really big monumental size spaces. They're usually, house size spaces.
Mm-hmm.
When you start cleaning off all that extra ornament and detail, it makes the space feel so much bigger.
Yes. It doesn't, you don't need to frame every single thing, right?
Right.
It does. It is a lot cleaner looking. And I think that's a style that draws a lot of people to this neighborhood specifically, or at least over the years it has.
Yeah.
And I imagine that it continues to do so because they just don't build homes like this anymore.
Well, they can if people want that.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we have an opportunity to kind of share with people our excitement about that type of home and what it meant and what it means to us. Because I think most people still have that, sense of optimism.
Mm-hmm.
And so how can the home reflect that? It's just hard to do that when you have so much competition with, like you said, these great big builder homes that come in, and they are floor plans that were all drawn in Texas or someplace.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't really have any sensitivity to the neighborhood or to the to the climate or anything.
It really shows, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I mean, Florida is so specific in its climate and its, the needs of it. It's like, we had the jalousie windows here that crank out,
Yeah.
right? And so like certain times of year, those are really helpful. And we had an attic fan, so you would flick that on and it could pull the hot air out and just like expel it through basically a chimney kind of structure. And that was really great for certain times of year. And all of these houses you can tell are built for Florida,
Yeah.
which is pretty
Yeah.
special.
And they've acclimated well, I think, over the years to like adding air conditioning. Most of them weren't air conditioned, so all the windows were across from each other for that cross ventilation.
Right.
There was just a lot of little tricks they played with the roof lines and shading, so you did get some sensitivity to the Florida heat. So
It's kind of important, especially as the
Yeah.
climate is changing and it's getting warmer, and
yeah,
it's a little scary. Yeah.
it is scary, and that's another reason I think people overlook the simplicity of these homes. You can apply so much technology to insulate yourself, or you can coat yourself with enough technology so you don't have to face the reality of climate change. But at some point it's going to break down.
Yeah.
So that's what these houses have. They're all concrete block, they're all real sturdy, they're all really simple. How many hurricanes do you think these houses have survived?
All of them.
Yeah,
So far.
yeah. All of them.
Knock on wood.
Right.
Yeah, these are built to last. I mean, the block, and we've had insulation added to the block here too. So they drill in and they fill that, with foam insulation, and that really helps because we get a lot of sun exposure during the day,
Yeah.
the front of our home. So, and we have a pretty big driveway, and it's dark in color, which is not the best. We won't choose that next time around, but it does kind of soak up a lot of the heat. So that has kind of alleviated some of our, energy efficiency problems that we have. And insulation in general isn't the best here, but we've improved it over time as well. It's just, you do what you can over time, and
Yeah.
just make it make sense for you and your budget. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it's such a great foundation. It's like the best starting point imaginable, really.
Definitely. Yeah, your house has a fairly open to the southwest, like this pocket. So trying to mitigate the solar heat coming into that pocket is probably pretty important. But then
Yeah.
back here, Michael, it's so beautiful because it's shrouded, the shade and just the kind of the quietness of it. So I think this is really the victory. So
Yeah, this is really what drew me to the house. I mean, aside from the layout and the look of it itself, just seeing this backyard, and it's so spacious. It's a corner lot with a pool, and just it really, it's always pretty hospitable back here. So I've been able to record the podcast back here, which is really nice, keeping safe during pandemic times and all of that, and just being immunocompromised. So there's a lot of consideration to these spaces. And it's like, during lockdown in 2020, this porch is exactly where we were like most of our time, right?
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
this was where our quality time was. And even through the summer, it's just like, you can sit out here. We've got a ceiling fan. Those kind of things are really that Florida experience of just,
Definitely.
you can be outside year round and enjoy it, for the most part year round.
Yeah. Yeah, and that should continue. I mean, this is like the quintessential Florida experience. You're right. The houses that I see going up don't seem to have that anymore. They're all centered around a big screen TV in the middle of the house. So
Right.
they're kind of missing that. They could be anywhere.
Yeah, it bums me out so much to see that. It's like, you can get that in almost any other newer neighborhood too, really. It's very cookie cutter. And I mean, the houses, they're nice houses. I think they're built with quality in mind, but those other considerations are so important. And then when it doesn't fit in with the style of the neighborhood, it's kind of heartbreaking, because it's like, you don't want this to go away. Like this look, this like feel is so special.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I think there's enough integrity right now anyway to Audubon Park. We have a lot of, long-term residents, and we have enough people that moved here because of it.
Yes.
And my feeling is people tend to self-select where they live because of issues or values, I think is probably a better word. People tend to self-select because of values that they see reflected in their neighborhood.
Yeah.
It was interesting because when I lived up there, it was in Winter Park, and I was on the board of Casa Feliz. And we were trying to really kind of shout out about historic preservation being a strong value for Winter Park, because people move there because of its heritage.
Right.
And we brought in Maureen DeCamp, who comes from DeLand, and she talked about the preservation in houses in DeLand.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much you've been up there. It's rich in these beautiful old houses going back to the 1800s.
Mm-hmm. I love the downtown. I haven't been through the neighborhoods a whole bunch, but the downtown is it's an impressive little downtown. Like, I love what they have going on there.
Isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I toured a few houses with her and then sort of on my own. And she made an interesting statement. She said, people move to DeLand, they buy a house, like a 100-year-old house, and they fix it up. She goes, whereas in Winter Park, people move and buy a 100-year-old house and they tear it down and build a new house.
Mm.
So people are self-selecting to go there because of that,
The
fixing
trend.
it up.
Yeah. Because that's part of a community, right? You don't want to be necessarily at odds with what everybody else is doing in the community.
Mm-hmm.
And most people here are definitely keeping their homes. As houses sell, we'll kind of see if that trend changes, and hopefully not. But that's an interesting point. People are keeping with the aesthetic of it and the style, and they appreciate that, and that's what draws them to it.
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's been interesting. So when I did these walks around and just started noticing all these kind of really interesting details, it just gave me the urge to paint about it. So the paintings were small. They were about the size of a laptop maybe. But the idea was just kind of take the colors and the shapes and the geometry and just even the road patterns and just kind of reflect them back in some form that I really kind of enjoyed.
Yeah, that's so cool. Do you visualize a map ever? Because there's some sort of like topography feel to some of it, or is it just kind of like a feeling like you were describing, just kind of the different elements and you put it together?
Yeah, sometimes I do visualize the map. I look at the map of Audubon Park and the way the roads kind of connect and the geometry of them. There's a couple of angled roads, so that means you have some really interesting corners.
Yeah.
But they also, to me, I was kind of blending my feelings about those with the feelings about the angled roof lines. And sometimes the architecture has, like, there's a couple of porches on Chelsea and then on, I think, Robin, where the porch actually comes out at an angle. It looks like at the bridge of a ship. It's so cool.
Yeah.
So just the subtlety of those just kind of turned into, I guess, just, I don't know what I would call it, impressionism or something. But I was also doing a lot of looking at like Richard Diebenkorn. And he did a series when he moved to Ocean Park, California, that just took the patterns of colors in the landscape rather than literally painting landscapes and gridding or mapping his canvases that way. And so I actually started with taking that idea of Ocean Park and can I do a Audubon Park series just like his, but really about the colors we have here, make it very specific to this neighborhood.
That's so cool.
So it was really just a kind of an experiment more than anything else.
Yeah, I love it. It definitely, even upon first glance, I'm like, I see where this is coming from, right? It's like even like the house colors that are chosen here. You can see all of that kind of mixed in. There's just like elements, and it's very. You can tell also just your architecture brain is kind of looking at these lines and looking at these patterns and things, and it's a very cool series. How many pieces do you have now, roughly, on Audubon Park?
Yeah, thank you. There's I think I'm up to number 34. I put them on, so I have a page on Fine Art America, and one of them, like I just sold another one today. One of them, it's been on masks, coffee mugs, iPhone cases, prints. It just kind of keeps on going.
I love that. That's so cool.
And then some of the others have been kind of going too. So it's been fun. I price them to sell. They're for people to enjoy. And hopefully people do, and I'm just going to keep going with them.
I love that. It's so, I mean, that artistic vision and based on your own experience of the neighborhood, right? It's like identity, right? There's so much identity here that I think people gravitate towards, and people feel really proud about that.
The other thing that's interesting and I'm sure you guys have seen it too as you walk around Audubon Park, is there's actually a surprising amount of personalization in terms of art that people put out in their lawns or on their houses that's actually really good, which is cool. We did, I do concrete sculpture, and Kim said, we've got this back corner here we don't know what to do with. Why don't you put some concrete work there? So I actually built a little sculpture garden back there of it. And I've noticed there's quite a few other small, like, things people have either made, some of them they've bought, but there's a couple of wood carvings over on the far east side. There's a really beautiful, it's just a sort of Ikebana rock collection on Oriole. And there's a few other painted on walls or sculpture on walls. There's one section of Finch. If you walk, like, there's a it's very traditional. It's like you would be in an Italian city, and you would see there's like a saint, like a plaster saint on a house, but it is on this axis that you walk down the sidewalk and you can see it from like 5 blocks away, and you get closer and closer and closer, and there it is. And so whoever put it there knew what they were doing. And so there's little moments like that where you start to see Audubon Park spatially like really interconnected in a really good way.
Yeah. And any other neighborhoods that stand out to you that you've seen that in, like either in Central Florida or in your travels? Has there been a time when you've walked through a neighborhood or driven through a neighborhood when you're like, they also have this here?
There's quite a few, actually. I'll put Europe aside for a minute because we measure their age in centuries, right? So they've had time to get it right.
This is true.
But the one that comes to mind immediately, Michael, is the north end of Boston.
Okay.
I don't know if you've been there.
I've heard so much about, and I haven't spent a ton of time there. So, I need to check that out because you're not the first person to mention that.
Oh, when you get to Boston next, make a point of going to the north end and get off of Hanover Street, which is the main drag full of restaurants, and just walk around. You can take the Freedom Trail, which takes you up to the Old North Church. And it's like Venice. There's all these little twisty, windy streets. But each one, there's something special. Somebody's put a mural on a wall that you can see in a gap between buildings, just a flash.
Wow.
And then you have to walk around a building, and then suddenly there it is.
That's cool.
Yeah.
A little preview before you actually get there.
Yeah. And there's just all these little moments there. And it was started in the 1600s, but it's gone through so many generations. And I think it was the Irish that immigrated to Boston, lived there, and they rebuilt a lot of it in the 1800s. The Irish that came in the late 1800s, I guess out of the potato famine, moved to the North End because it was cheap. And a lot of them were brick masons. And so most of the brick buildings were built during that era. And then in the 1920s, the Italians came. The Irish had prospered, and it gentrified. They moved out. And then the Italians came and they rebuilt it. And so it's gotten these layers of cultures that make it really rich and interesting.
Wow, yeah.
So, yeah.
What a unique story, too, for an American neighborhood to have that multicultural influence, right? And so specific, right, to certain regions of the world, and to be able to trace it back. It's taken a while to kind of redefine what the new identity is after sort of the second generation of people moving into this neighborhood, as opposed to when it started in the 50s. And it has it's sort of evolved with the times, and people have found so much love with this neighborhood and these homes. During the shutdown too, like, we were going on nightly walks, and we still try to do it, but just looking at the houses and looking at the choices that were made, the creativity and just the passion that people have for making their houses look great and unique. It's just spectacular. We're very lucky here.
Yeah, we are. We really are. And I think you made an interesting point I was going to pick up on earlier. We don't have an HOA. This is all pure, spontaneous, from the heart, genuine participation in the public side of our neighborhood. That's really critical. If you could see what makes that happen, you could embottle it and reproduce it, you might not have to have HOAs as much,
Right.
I don't know.
Well, we have code enforcement for things that are a hazard, right? It's like, it seems with people that most HOA stories that you hear are just people like nitpicking or like wanting uniformity, right? And it creates just sort of a different like policing system in a way of just people being like, no, you need to make your house like fit in.
Well, they're there to protect property values, and for some people, they really need that.
Yeah, sure.
And I think for the code enforcement, as long as it is a life safety concern, that's very, very valid. When it kind of strays into design or subjective aesthetics, that's when you have to question what are you really trying to accomplish here. So I think there's some value to that.
Yeah.
So, but talking about neighbors and kind of veering towards Audubon Park past a little bit, I was very lucky when we moved here to meet Pete Kirby across the street, who had moved here and lived here since 1974. And he was attached to the Navy base at the time, but he retired. He was an accountant. And he died recently. And of course, his house is now one of those big brand new ones.
That's a bummer. That's
Yeah.
very sad.
Yeah. But he lent me his, and he told some great stories about people in the neighborhood that he knew. But he lent me once his abstract. So at the time in the 70s, it was common when you bought a house for a realtor to research the title all the way back, like all the way.
Wow.
So the thing was like an inch and a half thick, and I read it, and I wish I still had it, but he asked for it back, and I said sure, and I gave it back, and now it's probably gone in the landfill.
Right. Oh, what a bummer.
But
so that was basically 20 some years of documentation on the house. Is that what it was?
Well, it goes back further, Michael. So
wow.
Audubon Park was part of a Mizell land grant, homestead land grant, given by Chester A. Arthur to some family named Mizell. And they had it, and I don't remember a lot of the interim stories, but it ended up, they sold during World War I, that section where I lived down there on Chelsea, across from Lake Druid, that became a horse racing track.
I had heard that before. Yeah, I've seen some photos, maybe of a polo match that was happening over there too, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there was like a balloon or an aerial photo I saw somewhere, not in the abstract, but somewhere else, where it caught like a corner of it. It's very interesting.
Yeah. You would just never know it now, right?
Yeah, you would never know.
There's like no trace of it whatsoever.
Right. Yeah, and then after that, the whole area became an orange grove owned by, you guessed it, Dr. Phillips. And then after World War II, Dr. Phillips decided that growth was coming this way. So he rezoned it to turn it into Audubon Park. And what's interesting, two things are interesting about that. So they laid it all out. But one interesting thing is that if you're going up Bumby past Vivada, you have to go like on this S curve. You have to kind of go to the right a little bit and then continue up.
Right.
Bumby didn't used to do that. It went dead straight up. And you can still see that pathway, that old Bumby right-of-way, if you kind of walk around that neighborhood. But he had to do that in order to create the plat for Audubon Park.
Yeah, because the border that is like one of the Audubon Park borders for the residential neighborhood itself, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
It's a very odd demarcation. I just recently looked this up too. It was like it's not the same for the entire neighborhood. It actually goes a bit north, or a bit south rather,
Yeah.
on Bumby itself,
Yeah.
to capture a swath. So that, do you know what the purpose was of that extra bit of land?
Well, he zoned it into residential. So that was
But why
actually
that decision was made, is that in the books at all?
that wasn't in the book.
Interesting.
Unfortunately.
That's going to be the great mystery of Audubon Park, I think.
Yeah, we need to solve that mystery.
Indeed.
But then the other interesting thing in there was, and this ties back to something else I'll talk about, there was a lawsuit brought against him to stop development. They didn't want just another subdivision. It's like, we're going to stop growth. Just like you hear today. It was just too much.
Sure.
So it was a very controversial thing to even build Audubon Park back then. Two of the plaintiffs in the
People worry about density, right? They're like, how are we going to handle this extra traffic and resources?
density, stress on the city, too much.
Wow. I didn't know we were a controversial neighborhood in that way.
Yeah, we were. He ultimately won. Two of the plaintiffs in that lawsuit were Ida Ryan and Isabel Roberts. So Ida Ryan was the first woman who graduated with an architecture degree in the United States.
Wow.
She went to MIT, got her degree like in 1913 or something, and moved to Orlando and practiced. Isabel Roberts was a draftsperson who was apprenticed under Frank Lloyd Wright in Chicago, or up in Wisconsin. She left and came here, and so the two women together formed their own practice, and they were architects here in the early part of the 20th century.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. What a star team.
It was a star team, and there's a few buildings left that they designed, and the garage apartment that apparently was their studio is still standing over in the Park Lake district.
Oh, okay.
So that's the Audubon Park history past.
Yeah. I'm always so fascinated to see photos and learn more stories, and even just, the things that can be done with maps online, and just kind of noting like points of interest. And I look forward to working with people, kind of putting together different things for the neighborhood, just architecturally things to look for, and maybe some history of, this used to be this, and you can just pinpoint it on a map, right?
Yeah. When I was, I worked to restore the Audubon Park Covenant Church over the COVID break, the pandemic break too.
That's such a great building.
Yeah, and we learned a lot about the history of that also. That was a fascinating building with a rich history, and it's right there in the middle. And that whole urban pattern, Michael, of like the neighborhood with the neighborhood church, with the Episcopal Church being the other neighborhood church.
Right.
So we had two. You don't see that ever today. If you look at the way subdivisions are planned now, and even the one just to the east of us, there's not a single lot that was left over for a religious institution.
Yeah.
But when they laid out Audubon Park, boy, they were like right there in the middle.
It's the heart. Yeah. The heart center.
They knew what to do.
And that building, I imagine it didn't probably change much from when it was originally built. I mean, it very much looks of that time, and it has this kind of historic, timeless look to it. Did you find any surprises that they had added things or changed things to the building over the years?
Yeah, there's quite a few small things, but it's essentially pretty intact. When they added air conditioning, they did it in a very clever way, but it's definitely changed parts of it. But what's interesting is it's really well done. The architecture looks as if it were here before. Like, we came upon this old Spanish mission church, and we've kind of reoccupied it, and Audubon Park grew up around it. So there's kind of this tantalizing
story that the architecture tries to kind of suggest.
Mm-hmm.
If you go into the sanctuary, which was the original, is actually very much in sync with that mid-century look. The laminated curved beams,
Mm-hmm.
the clean, simple style of it. It just has a very contemporary feel to it, contemporary for its time. And then when you go back into the fellowship hall, it's got the big open heavy timber trusses and that very tall space with the unpainted wood ceiling in it.
Mm-hmm.
That just has like this really interesting, friendly sort of, I don't know, like a barn-like atmosphere that just looks so right when you come in from the street. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a master plan we uncovered that has future wings that would like jut out into the parking lot.
Hmm.
So that could be part of Audubon Park's future.
Interesting. Yeah, there's so much space there too, and they've done a great job over the years, kind of using that space for events and pop-up markets and things like that.
Yeah.
And Pastor Sarah Robinson is such an incredible inspiration for the neighborhood.
She's just awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a religious person, but she is definitely one of those people that just has this gravitational pull to her that you're just like, I want to be around whatever it is that you're doing. It's just so, she's so cool.
She's
so
always
awesome.
like way ahead, but not super far ahead. But whatever, I'm thinking, it's like sometimes I'll meet her and like she's already there and she's already thought it through and she's getting there. So there's something really cool about that.
Yeah, and she's very committed to just the trajectory of the neighborhood, and she's been involved in so many things. She was kind of instrumental with fleet farming and bringing that here and having that like foundational setup here. So many cool things that she's
Fleet
done.
is great. Yeah, we try to accommodate Fleet in all of the design work that I did so that we could keep that partnership going because it's really, really important.
Yeah.
So
using, we have great growing seasons in Florida, and we have all of this land that with a little amending of the soil, you can get some really great crops out of.
Yep.
So instead of just growing grass, put that land to work, right?
Yeah. It's the lawn. The lawn has had its day.
I agree, and I hope that continues. It's all of these things that I guess 20 years ago nobody was thinking about really. Even maybe 10 years ago here, people weren't thinking about it as much, but it's definitely here to stay, and you can tell.
Yeah, for sure. And that goes to some of the things that I've been thinking about in terms of Audubon Park future, if you will. I don't know if you've heard of Akira Miyawaki. He's the kind of guru. He creates these microforests. And he goes to a particular locale. He's been doing this for a long time. I actually heard him lecture probably 20 years ago. And they'll, like in dense urban cities in Asia, he'll take specific lots and look at what grows, look at the soil, the climate, the environment, and so forth. And he'll start bringing in plants, and he creates these, what they're called climax forests. So if you go from empty land to a forest that's mature, it takes about 200 years. He's figured out a way to put the right species together in the right locations with the right, sun angles and water sources and so forth, that he can get them to do that in 20 years.
Wow.
So if you think of a little chain of those in a city, suddenly there's like this lungs of a city come back. It cleans the air, it lowers the temperature, it brings in, animal species. You suddenly can hear bird songs. Well, I think it's interesting when you walk around Audubon Park that not just the hardware, but the software. So there's a few lots and a few small pockets that are sort of public space that have almost those little microforests going. Is if we were, as a neighborhood, if we were able to get a conscious effort together to really figure out how to enhance and protect and maybe add a few more, we
Mm-hmm.
could create an incredible symbiotic kind of futuristic natural environment here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And even with the size of each lot for each home, there's a lot that we can do to add to that landscape as well, right? I know the
yeah,
city has continually has like free tree programs where you can sign up and have it installed or,
hmm,
delivered or pick it up and kind of get that future forest or future just growth going,
yeah,
because it's super important, especially as you see a lot of the laurel oaks have kind of aged out of their lifespan is only 50-ish
yeah. They
years.
were planted when Audubon Park was built, and they're probably at the end of their lifespan. And they're the kind of
Mm-hmm.
tree that is very susceptible to hurricanes. The root system's like that.
Mm-hmm.
Putting his hand on the table and splaying his fingers out. For those of you who
Just
can't
like
see,
that, you can
so
envision
it
it.
just kind of topples, and you see him after hurricanes,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to kind of enrich with a little bit more sort of resilient species.
Mm-hmm.
But there's pockets, Michael, like at the end of, I want to say it's not, maybe it's Tanager or Osprey, one of those two that goes down to the end of the old, the office center.
Mm-hmm.
There's almost an empty lot, but it's not. That could be one.
Yeah.
There's a pocket as you
It
come
kind
around.
of dead ends. Is that the spot that you're talking about? It's like,
Yeah,
yeah, not far from the lake. That would be perfect, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you can name them, but there's a few around here, and if you could create those little opportunities that would allow other species and to really kind of enhance all that,
Mm.
then I think you could really build a unique little ecosystem here.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah, and we've had a lot of, in addition to kind of backyard gardens and front yard gardens,
mhm.
the pollinator gardens, and kind of
Yes,
continuing that pathway for monarchs and other butterflies and other birds. We have obviously Lou Gardens is right there, and
hmm,
it's just this enormous ecosystem, this
yeah,
botanical garden that's so beautiful, and everybody needs to go check out and get an annual membership because it's only like $50 for a family, something like that, and it's like you can just go all year, and it's the best.
I know it's fantastic, and it
Mm-hmm.
got great visitation over this particular season. I saw people really lined up to go grooving on the light project there.
Yeah, and since the pandemic, that's been one of the positive outcomes is that people are still able to do outdoor things pretty safely,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
wonderful. I mean, it's the best news.
it is. Yeah,
And the vaccines obviously are, those things make us feel more safe navigating in the world, and we're not traveling for that reason, if we can't fly anywhere, so it kind of limits where we go. But we're doing outdoor stuff here all year round, and
hmm,
like Lou Gardens is a perfect spot for just getting some exercise, some fresh air, and seeing some of the most beautiful plants in the world,
oh, I know. It's
right? We're
fantastic.
so
Yeah,
lucky, and
yeah.
it's just tucked away in the corner, and some people drive by it and they don't think too much about it, but I
Mhm.
always try to remind people, like, yeah, why don't you go to Lou Gardens? It's a
Yeah,
great day for that.
yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities here to take Audubon Park and make it even more specific and even more intense. There's a great community like you and many of natural artists and writers here in Audubon Park.
Mm-hmm.
And if we were able to somehow, um, I don't want to say get that together, but if we were able to just kind of like intensify that a little bit, we'd
Yeah.
have so much interesting, creative exchange that we start to have now, where it's kind of happening.
Yeah.
That would be, I think, it would be an interesting thing for us to really participate in.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think that having a collective of creative minds that are invested in the neighborhood, that really want to see it go to those great places, just getting better and better. And I mean, that's a lot of the work that we've been doing with the Main Street organization as well. You know, you have kind of the different facets of it. You have, you know, the business district, and you have historic preservation. You have kind of the organization, like advertising, you know, branding of the neighborhood. That's like a lot of the stuff that the Main Street organization does. And, you know, even initiatives of getting like park benches installed and bike racks and things like that. Just all of those little improvements over the years that have solidified that like walkability, the, you know, even with the crosswalk and kind of getting the push to that. It's like the Main Street has been working on that for years, and finally we got the budget approved, and it's here, and it's like one of the best things that's happened to the neighborhood in you know, the past few years, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
And kind of a more focused collective on the artistry of it and the preservation and things like that. Yeah, we'd love to get you in the loop with that, and,
Sure,
and
I'd
others.
love to
So
be. I have been doing a lot of traveling. So I don't feel I like to be very much participatory in my neighborhood. I just don't feel like I've been able to as much as I would like. But
yeah,
certainly happy to lend a hand, however it can fit.
that's exciting.
Yeah,
Thank you for that.
So, yeah, I think the other thing, interesting, unique feature of Audubon Park that I want to just discuss for a second, and it's a little controversial because there's a little bit of a push to change it, is the way Karen is now and how much it's been preserved from its original early 1950s state. You know, the buildings, if you break down the two strips on the south side, they at first look like single long buildings, but in fact they're not. They're individually built and they're individual lots. And they have these marvelous little, very minimal sort of detailing. Like there's a couple that have like these Art Deco sort of fluting in the columns in between the storefronts. Some of them have angled storefronts, like the one that is the flower shop across from Stardust.
Flower number 5.
Yeah. So there's a lot of subtle cues as to the real age of it. It was built back when, again, there were cars, but we had this, they still have this fairly intimate relationship between the sidewalk in front of the store and the actual street. So we didn't have the building pushed, 3,000 feet behind in a massive parking lot in front. So it was made kind of with that early mobility, but not to the, horrifying degree that you would see in strip malls elsewhere.
Right.
And it's rare, and if we lose that, we're not going to get it back.
Right.
And there's a value to that. I have to put my foot down and say there is a value to that. Is it pretty? No, it could use a lot of TLC. It could use everything that Main Street's talking about, a lot more landscaping, bury the power lines, give it some safety features like your crosswalk you mentioned. But if we lose that, what it seems like the inevitable thing is to turn it into another Baldwin Park, where we move the building right up on the road, make them park and back. The merchants are going to have a difficult time attracting people because the people want to drive by and park and go in.
Right.
A lot of the current businesses are surviving because of local support. So when you do the other thing, like, and I think of Winter Springs Town Center, for example, where you drive by on the highway, but you have to go around the back and park. If you bring it to that point, I don't know if we're going to keep the same pattern. And the other thing is that's only supported by kind of a triple net commercial structure, which means some guy on Wall Street is getting a debt collection from the tenant,
Mm-hmm.
And then that's his main check every month. It's a big check.
Yeah.
Because he's got to pay off, the Wall Street guy has to pay off his construction debt and everything. Then the tenant's got to write a check to the property manager for common area charges. Then he's got to write another check for, utilities and insurance and everything. It's triple net. That structure does not allow for small local businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Kelly's Ice Cream would never have been able to start up. They didn't go start up in Baldwin Park under a triple net structure. They started up here.
Right.
Why? Because they had a deal with a landlord that was a lot friendlier to start up businesses.
Absolutely. And
Lobos.
they started kind of small too, right? Mm-hmm. It's like they kind of built it. I mean, before they had a brick and mortar, they built their customer base.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
they did it very smartly and sort of it was like a thing of opportunity of the timing of the previous ice cream shop kind of moving out of there,
mm-hmm.
and they needed basically somebody to take it over. And it's like, do you want to do your ice cream here? And so they kind of grew it from there. And they may have even waited longer had that opportunity not come along, but it worked out great.
Yeah, when John closed his snow cone shop, it was perfect timing for Kelly's to move in. Yeah, but that's because of that setup, because I wrote an actual book about that whole strip back in 2010. Most of them were landlords that had owned it for years, so maybe a mortgage, maybe not, and their relationship with their tenant was very intimate. It wasn't like what you'd see in some of these newer developments where there's a property manager and then there's a facilities manager and there's like all these corporate layers that add costs to the whole situation.
Right. And it's sort of curated in that way too, because the owners, I've heard many a story of kind of what they would choose to have or not choose to have in this shopping district, right? Because they may still have businesses here, or they just want it to see it kind of go a certain way. So Joybird Books, for example, they were very excited to have them move in there because it's a neighborhood bookseller and they're very community focused. So it's kind of a perfect fit, really.
Yeah. And you wouldn't have that in like another town center, one of those fabricated town centers you see in these kind of newer developments. They just couldn't stand having that. They need a sure thing. It's got to be a CS. It's got to be this. It's got to be that. And I'll get to East End in a minute, because what you have with Joybird and Kelly's and most of the businesses along there, you have an entrepreneur who is greeting customers, putting out the merchandise, getting real-time feedback. He or she has a vested interest in the store's success. Whereas, a chain like a CVS, what's the highest paying job in that? The manager, $15.75 an hour or something. What is his vested interest in making sure the customer is served and served well?
They're committed more to a paycheck just because that's the nature of things. And it's like there's no room for creativity or improvement. It's just like, this is the process. This is what we do.
This is the brand.
Right.
We're going to do it on brand,
right.
And you have to greet customers a certain way. And you can't say, oh, hey, Mike, you can't bring your dog in. I mean, it's very antiseptic. And there's a place for that.
Sure. But
Audubon Park has grown and matured to a point where we don't need that.
Right.
I don't think.
No, it's what makes our identity what it is too. And we are very central to a lot of things, and you can drive less than 5 minutes and be at a Target, And
we have all we need down there on Colonial.
We do.
Yeah.
We do. And at some point, Fashion Square Mall is going to become something.
Well, right now it's slated to be more Baldwin Park.
I see.
Yeah. And maybe that's its highest and best use. I don't know. I did a zine, which I peddled at the Zine Fest, which was I told people, I found this in my neighbor's trash can. And when I read it, I thought, we need to get this out there. So she's like this corporate feasibility consultant, and she doesn't know I have this. So these are contraband. And so you open it up, and it's a feasibility study to turn Fashion Square Mall into a vertical farm. Like indoors is perfect. You can grow, 30 feet tall and create the public promenade inside could turn into farming.
Yeah.
And then the individual stores could be packaging, washing and processing. And then you flip them all inside out so that the public side is now around the perimeter.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the store sells out of. And then the parking lots, goats, chickens.
Yeah. What a vision. That's so funny. So it's like this guerrilla thing that's like, it's not a real document, but it's a zine. So it's kind of like, it's like this fantasy of like, this is what it could be. And what if this is what they were planning to do and it was controversial?
Yeah, exactly. It's too controversial to let out. So it got people kind of like, oh, I want one of those.
Yeah, That's neat. I love that.
Anyway, it was kind of fun. So I sold a few, and the ones I didn't sell, I actually put in Joybird. So you're welcome to go look at one in Joybird.
Very cool.
I don't know if they have them under the desk or not. They may you have to ask.
Yeah. It's like that. It's confidential, right?
Yeah.
That's so fun.
So that was fun.
Yeah.
And then I took one other stab at, you remember the peacock guy, Mike?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when he moved out, he's gone.
Yeah.
And then Ryan Rivas put a post up that said, oh, there it is. There's his house where it said demo on it. It's kind of sad. And a lot of the comments were, oh, no, it's another McMansion.
Mm.
And so I asked the question, why does it have to be another McMansion?
Mm-hmm.
So you take a look at that strip of land there along the edge between Lake Druid and Bumby.
Mm-hmm.
And they're abnormally narrow lots. They're just barely wide enough to put a house on.
Yeah.
So in terms of waterfront property, yeah. But if it's really valuable, I mean, Bumpy's a busy street.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so they're not going to ever be like super high value Islesworth style,
right?
Real estate.
Yeah.
So if you take the 7 there with the narrowest section, starting with Mike's house, what if we did this? What if we got together with the city? We'd have to get the city to partner with us and say, we'll buy all those lots at the market value they will be in the year 2050.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, who could walk away from that? If you told me you want my house and the value it'll be in 2050, I'd like, sure, why not? Take the money and run.
Yeah.
So we buy them all, turn that section into maybe a farm for fleet farming.
Mm-hmm.
There's an actual duct, an underground culvert that connects that lake with all the other lakes in the neighborhood. And it's all for, water control.
Right, yeah.
So there's always water flowing through it. What if you took that water movement that's under that lot and turned that into a hydroelectric plant? And then all the houses, it wouldn't serve a lot, but it would probably serve all the houses around Lake Druid, right?
Yeah, that's
so
something.
Suddenly you're hurricane proofed.
Yes.
And then you could do fun things like you could take the edge there and maybe you could build a launch viewing dock because it's perfect to stand there and look out towards the east.
Mm-hmm.
Fun stuff like that. But that whole lake there had a pretty nasty use. It was the Navy. Pete, my neighbor, told me that was the Navy base's dry cleaning plant where the Lake Druid Park is.
Mm-hmm. I had heard that. Yeah.
So
they did quite a bit of cleanup too, right? Is that
there's still cleanup going on, and if you go back there, there's all the test wells, and you can see like there's a reservoir that they're pumping him into, and I guess somebody periodically comes and checks it.
Mm-hmm.
So what if you did whatever you needed to? I mean, I'm sure there's bioremediation. Somebody smarter than me could figure out to do, to enhance the cleanup effort. So it becomes, cleaning all the lakes that are connected.
Yeah. That's so needed too.
Yeah. So the idea there is twofold. One, it's, and I was hoping Gabby would be here because she said something in her talk about the market and community market I wanted to pick up on.
Yeah.
And the term community, And I'm keying in on something there, which is the idea of social ecology.
Mm.
And it's essentially that we participate in our own future.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of lying back passively on our sofas and going, oh, there's another McMansion,
Mm-hmm.
could we not participate in the future vision of our own neighborhood?
Yeah. And we do, right? We
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe it's not that, but could it be something else that's kind of rich and bountiful?
Mm-hmm. There's so many opportunities for that. And, I think that those ideas are so important to keep those going, and like the right one is going to come along for the right opportunity. It's like with East End, you had this building that such great bones and this open floor plan, and you could kind of build out this market hall with essentially the market stalls the size that you want them. Having a project like that and having it come together in the way that it has, and it's like that's become sort of another huge draw. Like that's what makes this a destination neighborhood. It's one of the things, right?
Absolutely. And East End, I think, is a great example of what you just said. So, having been here now since 2002, and watching it go from sort of an abandoned school next to an abandoned church
Yeah.
to getting transformed, and knowing the agony it took to go through that transformation, because I participated in it. But having it come through and come out the other side and seeing what it is today,
Mm-hmm.
it can happen.
Yeah.
So we should take heart that we can actually make things like that part of our future. Yeah. And in her talk, she did something that's actually quite unfashionable today, and I'm really surprised that she did it, which is she actually gave credit to those who came before her.
Mm-hmm.
We're in an era now, as I'm sure you're aware, where everybody wants to hog the limelight and take credit and me, mine.
Yeah.
And what Gabby did was she acknowledged the market and her kind of receiving it or participating in it from Emily Rankin.
Mm-hmm.
And Emily also participated in East End. I actually helped her build her bar. I actually strapped on a tool belt and I designed it, and then we put it together. It was a blast.
Yeah.
She's one of those Audubon Park. She's like the Marcel Duchamp of Audubon Park. Every little thing, she didn't do a lot of things, but everything she did has turned into something really, really cool.
Yeah. The Main Street organization, she was foundational for creating that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So I thought that was quite mature and really excellent to hear her name again, and to know that was not forgotten. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Gabby is always very mindful of those things, and it's always hard to attribute credit where credit's due when it's something that Gabby has done, because she's so modest, and she doesn't love people talking about her, so she'll kind of wave the finger at me for all of this, but she's incredible.
Yeah, I'm very aware of her contribution to East End, and it couldn't have happened without her. And I'm just really happy that she's still here and still participating, and
Absolutely.
continuing to do what she's doing. So
Yeah, and she's such an inspiration.
yeah. So anytime you have a neighborhood that kind of stays intact and doesn't get made over, and the people stick around for a while, you start to see that enrichment, that kind of insertion of things into the space where they start to connect together.
Mm-hmm.
So, and architecturally, I feel like that's kind of like a maturing, like you see the maturing of a forest when certain species come. It's when you see those kind of things happen. Somebody builds an addition, and a window might look odd where it is, but it actually faces a really important view, because that view is there. And then you see someone in that view actually respect that and like clear a space or avoid blocking it. So with their house addition, so there's like this kind of dialogue over time between people.
Yeah, and you don't always know when those things are going to come around too, right? You don't know what's going to change exactly, but I think that even the fact that the bulk of this neighborhood has been relatively unchanged since the 50s. That's quite a long time to,
It
I mean,
is.
in relative terms.
It is. No,
Yeah.
in the 50s to today, what is that, 70 years?
Right.
Yeah. That's a long period in American terms. Things change so much and they move so fast. And so
Yeah.
70 years is a pretty good chunk of time.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And we're very fickle in the US too. So we decide, oh, this looks old. We don't want it anymore. Right.
Yeah.
But the trend for vintage and the trend for sustainability and just reuse is, I think, on a lot of people's minds as we see that things aren't made as well as they used to be. Right. And that's a common theme that we see.
Mhm.
So we gravitate towards the things that are well built and that are going to stick around now.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think, well, a lot of us do. I think, teaching people or kind of opening people's eyes to become aware of that is what's critical.
Yeah.
We're such a disposable culture, and the scary thing is we're addicted to that disposability.
Hmm.
The scary thing to me is that disposability is just getting more and more expensive. Now we've got these $1,000 iPhones, and we just throw them out and we're done.
Right.
And it's like how much time and effort and money has gone into this, but it's disposable.
And they're still good even when we stop using them, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's not that we stop using them because they're broken, or it's like it's not updating. It's like that built-in obsolescence thing that is so frustrating. It's so bad.
There's a real backlash to that.
Sure.
There's a new generation where they're using flip phones. They're cassette tapes, VCRs. They're going backwards and
Yeah.
they're fixing them,
Yeah.
which is kind of cool.
It is cool.
Yeah.
I don't know how like long term that would be, because there is something to this supercomputer that we carry in our pockets that, just for efficiencies and just connectedness in general, I think there are benefits and drawbacks to all of those things, but it's a hard
Yeah.
sell. I had a flip phone, and I know how limiting it can be, especially if somebody wants to text you. Basically, you're going to call them back because that's not going to work.
Well, that's true. There's definitely drawbacks to that. So you have to either become a Luddite,
Hmm.
consciously detach from that connectedness,
Yeah.
or what? I don't know. What
Yeah.
is the alternative?
I think we're still figuring that out.
Yeah.
And you are also an adjunct professor at Rollins College.
Yes. Now, I haven't taught there in a few years. I think my last course was probably 2017.
Okay.
I taught sustainable development, which when I showed up, they had me teach in the environmental studies department. They were all biologists and landscape architects, and they're like, we need somebody who knows something about buildings.
Interesting. Yeah,
So
sure.
I said, okay.
It goes hand in hand, right?
Yeah. And so I had, so they gave me this textbook and they said, here, teach sustainable development. Well, I thought it meant real estate development, Michael.
Okay.
I'm like, oh, that'll be easy. I know all about that. Well, it wasn't. It was economics. And I had avoided economics all my life.
Yeah.
That's not a subject I really wanted to know.
Yeah.
But you know what? I read it. It took me a month. I read the book,
Mhm.
and there's like paragraphs where I have to read it like 3 times and like cross-reference. What are they saying before I would get it?
Yeah.
But I came through and out the other side, and now I get it. And I'm a big believer in what economic decisions are more important than we all know. I still say that a lot of economic problems are at their heart. They're actually design problems.
Mm.
We can talk about the way cities are structured so that the richest people commute the farthest. So that's a display of wealth.
Mhm.
The way that economics work sometimes in the way we structure the design of spaces have a much more interesting relationship than we think.
Yeah.
But economics, now that I've kind of gone through it, and I taught the class like 4 times, so it seemed like things started to click after the first or second time.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating subject.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and it turned me on to a lot of thinkers. I'm still trying to chase down some authors that they are some philosophers and thinkers that tipped me off to that I still think are interesting and worthwhile to research. So there's one named Arne Ness who wrote about deep ecology, and I don't know enough about it to even talk about it, but I've been frantically searching. He's been out of print for years, but he was one of like the three or four thinkers, kind of the deep foundational background of the 60s. Arne Ness, Murray Bookchin, Kenneth Boulding. Those were, some of the bigger ones. Lovelock, who wrote about planet Earth, Gaia. He coined the concept of Gaia. And so trying to find what they had to say and understanding its relevance today is sort of just a personal quest. So,
and it helps to have that holistic view of it, right? It's like there's so much more to what goes on than kind of what we see or what we know about, right? There's just so many powers that moving things in a certain direction, and it does all center on money, unfortunately, right? It's that thing that we can't get around.
Yeah.
It's important to play along with that game, because if you can make it economically viable to whoever you're trying to get interested in an idea, that's how you're going to sell it.
Yeah, you have to think of it like water. Like everybody needs water to survive. We all need money to survive. It's the trick is exactly what you're saying, is how do you make someone else feel like there's the shared outcome that we can all benefit from.
Yeah.
So that there's not like a giving and a taking scenario. That's a very false way to set it up. The transactional model.
Right. It's something that I've always struggled with, just putting a value on things. I am more interested in the experience of the time that we have here, because it's limited. That's our ultimately our greatest resource is our time.
Yeah.
And the value of time isn't stressed enough, and it's all about money for a lot of people. And it's like the amount of time that you have isn't going to change.
No,
right?
That's right.
It's pretty well defined, or it's going to be less than what it's defined as. So make the best of it, right?
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And if you focus just on money, you'll probably get a lot of it. But everything else that you sacrifice to get it, usually you're going to regret. And so to me, I'm the same as you. I'm probably the world's worst, giving away my time, or, I want to sit down and brainstorm to come up with the best idea, and we'll figure out like who's going to pay for it later.
Sure.
Those are some of the things that you just have to recognize in yourself and try not to be your own worst enemy sometimes.
Yeah, but you're spending your time where it is valued, and you value that experience as well.
Yeah.
So there is mutual earning from it, even if it's not monetary, right? Like you're spending your time for good things.
And that's what Kenneth Boulding talks about is there's the transactional power. I give you this, you give me that. Then there's threat power, which is you give me that or I'll hit you.
Right.
And then there's integrative power, which is we both work together and we will produce that.
Yeah.
And that's the highest and most difficult to achieve, but it also creates the best results. So, and that's where you see, and it's the things we were just talking about in Audubon Park, the kind of shared outcomes, somebody's sensitive to what another neighbor's doing. And so they respect it with the placement of a sculpture or a plant or a tree.
Yeah.
And suddenly, or like the colors people mix to put on their houses on your street, the blues and greens, and how they kind of work together.
Yeah.
Nobody had to tell them to do that.
Nope.
They just did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's beautiful, isn't it? It's just living art, and it's kind of, I don't know, our coexisting with nature here and how we go about that. I think it gives me hope just to be in that element. I think that hope is so valuable too,
Yeah.
And it gets harder and harder to come by, but it's always there. There's bad things happening in the world. There are always going to be bad things, but there's always going to be good things as well. And it's upon us to look at both of those things and look at the good things closer, because having a focus on the negative is not doing us any good at all.
Not.
It really is not serving us.
It's serving people who give it to us.
Right.
The news media and wherever you're getting all the negativity from.
Yeah.
I mean, you could name the sources, but how is it helping us?
Right.
I'm too busy to worry about that kind of stuff.
It's great. It's so ideal to be that way too. And I have to take breaks from the news for that reason. Just like, okay, what's the good news? Where's the hope? I need some of that just to get through my day, just to like do the things that I want to do and put my energy towards positive outcomes. And that's really where it's at, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And there's so many of those things that are happening just before our very eyes, and we just overlook it. And that's another thing Boulding says. He says, the traditional history is all about the dialectic, wars like Napoleon conquered and, the Mao conquered China. And there's just like these stories that take up a lot of space. But what he says is the true nature of change is non-dialectic change, meaning things that transform gradually over time. Those kind of things make more of a difference in our lives. We look at how we have so much more tolerance now. There's non-dialectic change in terms of sexual orientation, in terms of use of, you had the ketamine, Dr. Jenna, was talking about microdosing.
Right.
And so who could have talked about that even a few years ago?
Right.
So those are the kind of non-dialectic changes that are making a big difference in people's lives.
Yeah.
So that's what he's saying is don't look at the big stuff, just like the Who song, right? There goes the old boss, here comes in the new boss, same as the old boss.
Sure.
That's the dialectic change for you. Look at the non-dialectic change and you're going to really see something truly to focus on.
Yeah. That's so cool. I love that. Well, Richard, thank you for all that you do to create a positive atmosphere in this neighborhood. You're a man about town. I see you a lot at Stardust and different places. Where are the websites people can go to find your art and other things?
So I'm on Fine Art America. If you go to fineartamerica.com and you go to artist search, you can put my name. And I'm sorry, it's just so hard, but I just haven't put much out there in the internet and the media.
Maybe this is your year to do that.
Maybe it is.
Perhaps.
You've inspired me. Yeah.
Good.
That's got a lot of more current stuff in it. I sold out a lot of the Audubon Park series.
Excellent.
So I need to make some new stuff. But there's a crop of work which I just confined myself to 12 inches wide by 18 inches high. And then I've got about 24 pieces related to just sort of, a personal narrative that is going to be at the Hollerback Art House in March and April.
Oh, excellent.
So I'll tell you the website if I know it. I think it's just hollerbackarthouse.com up in Sanford.
Very cool. That's so exciting.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Ah.
So thank you. Well, thank you. This has been really lovely. I just enjoyed so much talking with you. It felt like it took about 15 minutes, but I'm sure it took longer.
You as well. It's been an hour and 35 minutes, if you can believe it.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
Time flies when you're podcasting.
Yeah,
it's a great thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for everything you do. You've just been really like the strongest voice to create an Audubon Park sense of community to me because, like I said, I'm traveling a lot, so I just love turning on and hearing who's Michael talking to now. So.
And it's always fascinating people. We have just so many great stories here and just people making a difference. And we need more of that in our lives. I think that's going to point us in a better trajectory if we kind of know the good things, more than focusing on the bad, I think.
Yeah. There's so many neighbors here that I want to get to know their stories more. Like Sarah's neighbor, I can't remember her name now. She had a very narrow scrape escaping from the Soviet invasion of Hungary in 1957.
Wow.
She told me her story one night, and I about fell off my chair. It's incredible. If you could get her to tell you her story.
I'll talk to Sarah and get her information, see if
Yeah.
she's interested.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a really good one. Pete had some great stories. He's gone now. Poor Pete. I could probably write them down. I've made up. I wrote a book about Audubon Park in 2010.
Yeah. What was that titled?
It never got published, so it
Okay.
remains a manuscript.
Okay.
But it was published, "The Soul of a Tropical City."
Oh, I love
And
that.
Thank you. Yeah, it was kind of looking at the way it was then and comparing it to urban design theory and how it broke every rule in the book, yet somehow it's vibrant and thriving. In the middle of, in 2010, if you remember, there was the serious economic downturn. There was a recession, and maybe
Right.
it was a depression.
Yeah.
But it was like a rock. So what made it tick? So I kind of analyzed and discussed that. Then the publisher, University Press of Florida, said, well, I think we can really get interest in a book about one neighborhood. Why don't you do the whole state of Florida?
Oh, okay.
So I went around and I found about 30 places that had the same sense of community and the integration of the neighborhood commercial business and then the residential behind it. Submitted it, and then the editor quit, and her senior editor just didn't have enough interest in the project to get it going. So
What a bummer.
yeah, so I'm thinking of taking it out, dusting it off, and kind
Yeah.
of restyling it now.
I think you absolutely should. There really is so much interest. I think it's just finding the right venue for it, right? It's, and we've got some good local publishers as well, Borough Press, and
Yeah.
you know, there might be something there, even if you just do the Audubon Park part. But it sounds like there's a lot of good information in there.
Yeah. I went from Jacksonville down to Miami,
Wow.
and Tampa, and like I said, I found 30 of them, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, keep shopping that. Maybe
Yeah.
2023 is your year to get that published.
That would be fun.
I like that idea, and I want to learn more about that. So
Yeah,
keep me
okay.
posted.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much. I know you probably want to get going, and my wife is probably going, when is he coming home?
I know we could go on forever. Well, Richard, thank you so very much, and we'll see you around.
Thank you, Michael. It's great to be here.
Hello, APGD. A neighborhood podcast is brought to you in part by Stardust Video and Coffee, Audubon Park's beloved neighborhood cafe, bakery, bar, and meeting place, located at 1842 East Winter Park Road. We're also sponsored by Red Light Brew Pub. Founded in 2005, Red Light is widely known as the source for world-class imports and microbrews. A wide selection of natural wines, plus award-winning beers brewed in-house. A full kitchen is in the works with an amazing menu by Chef Jess Tantalo. Located at 2810 Corinne Drive, please check out Red Light for all things beer and wine and soon food. Our theme song is by Christopher Pierce, and special thanks to Trey Hester for all of his help in making this podcast a reality. We do hope you enjoyed this episode. If so, please click subscribe and leave a review if you'd like. We'll see you next time.